Now, here in Lightroom, we're going to start out with one image. This is a raw file straight off of my camera. There has been absolutely nothing done to it. One of the things that I suggest is if you are going to play around in a program like Lightroom, Aperture, Photoshop, or Elements, you can do a little bit of basic editing here. Lightroom has something called the Develop module, Aperture uses the Adjustments pane, and Photoshop Elements have their own ways of editing images. So for this photo, I may take it into the Develop module and play around with the exposure. However, I want to just jump into Perfect Effects. So to do that, you have two different ways of accessing the suite here in Lightroom. The first is by right-clicking your image and going down to Edit In. And there you're going to see Perfect Effects. Now, I have the entire suite installed on my computer. So if you don't have the suite, you just have Perfect Effects 8. That's the only plugin that's going to pop up there. You also can go up to the File menu and scroll down to Plugin Extras. From there, you're going to see Perfect Effects 8 as well as Perfect Browse 8. So you can access either of the different programs there, and you can use which one you would like to visit first. If you're working through another program, there are a couple of different ways that you can get into the suite. Luckily, Aperture is extremely easy. You just right-click on a photo and choose Effects 8. And in Photoshop and Photoshop Elements, you go to the File menu down to Automate or Automation Tools, and you can find Perfect Effects 8 there as well. So it's very easy to access the program no matter where you are. Now let's go ahead and take this photo into Effects. Go ahead and right-click, choose Edit In, and we'll select Perfect Effects. Now, when you go through a program like Lightroom, you get the option of editing a copy with any Lightroom adjustments that you may have made. If you're going through a program like Photoshop or Elements that has a layered-based workflow, it will create an extra layer in your layer stack. It won't duplicate your file for you like it's doing here in Lightroom. It's going to create another layer that will be stacked in your layer stack. So we'll go ahead and edit our copy. We can choose our copy file options here. You can play around with what works best for you. So you can type in a new bit depth or resolution, whatever you'd like. Go ahead and click Edit. Now, when working inside Perfect Effects, let's go over the kind of basic interface of how the program looks. On the left-hand side of the screen is going to be your filters library. These are all of the base filters that you can apply to your images. And we have everything from bleach bypass, which is always really fun. We have borders and textures. We have our vintage and antique filters. We have grunge, glow. We have an HDR styler, which is really fun. So we have all of these different categories. Anytime I click on a category, let's go ahead and open one that's kind of nice and bright, cross-process. You're going to get these nice previews of what the image is going to look like if you apply that filter preset. Each one of these different filter categories contains filter presets, and these are ones that you can apply to your images. You'll notice that anytime I hover my mouse over any of these different previews, there's also this little tiny flag that pops up in the top left-hand corner. That flag allows you to save your favorite presets into a separate favorites library. Up in the top left-hand corner of your screen, you've got your filters library, and then right over here you have your favorites. If I click on this, these are all of my favorite presets, and these are the ones that I use on a pretty regular basis. So instead of having to scroll through the entire filter library to find them, I can select which one I want to save as a favorite, and it'll pop into that library for me. And it's a good way to navigate through the program, especially if you have some effects that you like to use over others. So I'm going to go ahead and choose to favorite this Fashion Passion Cross-Process filter. We'll go ahead and click inside that flag. And once it's filled in, it'll pop in there. Now, one of the other really cool things about the filter library, before we even add anything, is another way that you can actually take a look at what's going on with those filters is if you hover your mouse over any of these different categories, you can see this little tiny icon. It's called the Quick View browser. It's a grid with a little play button next to it, and it's a way for you to view a full screen look at all of the different filter presets in a specific category. So I'm going to go ahead and click on it next to the color enhancer category, and it's going to transfer me over to the full screen view. Now the thumbnails are pretty small, so I want to go down to the bottom left-hand corner of my screen and take this thumbnail slider and move it all the way over to the right. Now I get these nice big previews. So I can actually see what these filters are going to do to my image. And we have everything from cool shadows, which could be an interesting kind of creepy effect for this image because it was very hazy, very foggy. We have a couple of other really fun ones like increase color or decrease color so that we can saturate or desaturate the image. We also have basics like warmer or cooler, and I'm going to end up warming this image up quite a bit because I want to add that nice soft orangey glow. When I find a preset that I'd like to apply, I just click once and it'll add it to my photo. Now, once we've applied a filter preset here, on the right-hand side of the screen in the filter stack, you'll see that right on the bottom of the stack is my original photo. I hadn't even renamed it, so again, straight out of the camera. And then up above, it's placed that warmer color enhancer filter preset that we applied on top of our original photo. The way that the filter stack works is very similar to a layer stack. You can layer multiple different filters together to create a customized look. Down below, underneath the filter stack, is the filter options pane. Anytime that you apply a filter, any filter that you add, will give you a separate filter options pane. This is different for every single one of those different filters you see on the left-hand side. So this is the color enhancer filter options pane that we're taking a look at now. And you'll see right here at the top, we've got temperature, tint, and vibrance sliders. And all this little warmer filter preset has done is just moved that temperature slider over to the right. It's just gone through and added a little bit of yellowy orange to the entire photo. What's wonderful about all of these presets is they're all editable. So I can take this, and if I decide that it's way too warm for me, I want to bring it down a little bit, I can just take my temperature slider, click and drag it to the left, and we'll pull that warmth down just a tad. Now, there are tons of other options in this color enhancer pane, but I want to move on so I can show you a couple of the other really cool things here in effects. So up in the filter stack right up above, we've got our color enhancer layer that we applied. We want to add something on top of it. One of the biggest problems that I think happens with digital photography is you get this kind of hazy look to your photos. Now, this image is kind of cheating at the haze because it was taken on a really foggy morning. So, of course, it's very hazy. But I think almost everybody who's taken digital pictures knows that sometimes you get these images that just don't look quite as they don't pop out quite as much as you remembered them in person. They look a little soft, they look a little hazy, and they don't look as detailed as they did when you were shooting. If you're lucky and you have the most expensive camera on the market, you may not necessarily have that problem. But if you're like me and you can't really afford that really, really super nice camera, sometimes you get these images that are just a little soft. So we have this really, really cool filter here in Effects 8 that's a lot of fun. And it's called Dynamic Contrast. And I want to apply it on top of my warmer filter. So in that filter stack, there are two buttons on the bottom left, a plus and a minus button. The minus button will delete whatever filter you have selected in the filter stack. And the plus button, when I click on it, will add an empty layer. That means now I can add another filter if I'd like to. So let's go over to the left-hand side and open up the dynamic contrast category. Now you can already see from the thumbnails that it's going to be cutting through the haze and adding a little bit of contrast in there to really make it pop out quite a bit. So I'm going to start out with this called the soft preset. And it's the most subtle out of all 5 in the dynamic contrast category. And it's a good one to start out because I want to show you guys really how this filter works. So we'll go ahead and click to apply it. Now it's not going to do much right away. I'm going to go down to my filter options pane, and I'm just going to zero everything out so that we can really start from scratch and I can show you guys how this works. There are 3 different sliders up at the top, and they're underneath the detail section. These are small, medium, and large, which means that we've basically separated the photo down. We've gone through and we've looked at it, and we've separated it down into large, medium, and small elements. So there are larger areas of contrast, there are very small, fine detail areas of contrast, and then there's kind of this mid-range or medium that kind of falls right smack dab in the middle of everything. Each one of these sliders will correspond to those different contrast areas so that you can selectively choose how much contrast and how much you want to apply to each specific part of your photo. So let's start out with the large slider. Pay attention to what it's going to do to a lot of these very large trees on the left and the right-hand side as I move it over to the right, as well as a couple of these kind of stronger lines along the edge of the road. So we're going to go ahead and take that large slider and we're just going to pump it over to the right. You can already see a huge difference between no large slider, which will jump back down, still very hazy, and with it turned on. We're already cutting through all of that kind of digital haze and real fog. We live in the Pacific Northwest and it's foggy and rainy all the time, so we're used to this. So we're cutting through all of this fog here to make it look like everything is a little bit crisper. Now, the large slider is really great, but one of the things that you'll notice is it didn't touch any of these smaller little branches that are right up here at the top center of the photo. That's when we're going to go in and we're going to use our small slider. We need to get all of those little grungy details, like the dirt and the grime and the grass that's on the road, all those little tiny tree branches. So we'll take the small slider and move it over to the right. And it's just going to add a small amount of texture to all of those little bits. Now the medium slider hits everywhere that we haven't gotten to yet. It's going to hit this kind of center area in the back of the road that's really, really hazy. It's going to hit some of these smaller areas right along the center of the road in the front, and a couple of these little medium-sized branches. So again, we'll take that and move that over to the right, and it's just going to pump everything up. Now we've made a huge difference already with this image. And what's really cool about working with the filter stack is each one of these different filters can be turned on and off. You can see what your photo looks like with or without it by using these little eye icons. They're on the left-hand side of each filter here. And I'm just going to turn this dynamic contrast on and off so you guys can really see the difference. So I'll just click on that eye icon. This is what the photo looks like with just a warming filter. This is what it looks like with dynamic contrast. I can do the exact same thing with that color enhancer layer too. I can turn it on and off if I want to see if I like the image more or less, warmer or cooler. So we'll go ahead and just click on that eye icon. This is what it looks like a little bit cooler. This is what it looks like a little bit warmer. If I decide that I don't like a specific filter in my stack, I can select that. So I'm going to click on the color enhancer here, and I've decided that I don't really like it. I don't think it goes with my image. I'm going to go ahead and click that minus button in my filter stack, and then I'll go back up and select my dynamic contrast filter. And I like this a little bit better. It's got a spookier feel to it, and I think that that's really nice. Now down below in the dynamic contrast pane, one of the other really great things is you'll see that we went through and we selected that color enhancer layer and deleted it. And when we clicked back on the dynamic contrast layer, the filter options are still down here at the bottom, exactly where we left them. Everything is continually editable while you're here in Effects. So you can really spend some time playing around with how you like things to look, seeing whether you like it with or without a warming filter, deciding that you want more or less contrast in the large areas or the medium areas, and all those different things. You have access to a highlights and shadow recovery slider. So if you need to recover any of the very, very dark shadows or very, very bright highlights, which are not really a problem in this image. It's one of the wonderful parts of living in the Pacific Northwest. We don't get a lot of photos that are very blown out or very dark because everything is gray. So we have our highlight and our shadow sliders here if we need to pull out detail, but we also have our whites and our blacks. So to intensify the contrast even more, I can either click the auto button and it'll automatically try and set the white and black points. We'll go ahead and do that. Or I can move these manually if I want to. So I can move them around, and obviously I'm not going to blow it out this much, but you can see that these tools have a lot of power and a lot of oomph to them. So I'm going to go ahead and pull this down just a little bit. And I'll do the same with the blacks so they're not quite so intense. And there we go. Now the last slider here with dynamic contrast is your vibrance slider. And this just helps you pump up the vibrance of the image so it's not quite so flat. If you've ever used something like clarity or tonal contrast, it desaturates your photo a little bit, and that's really frustrating. So we built in this vibrance slider so that you can do it all in one fell swoop. So I'll go ahead and move that over a little bit to the right. Now, sorry, almost hiccuped. So in the filter stack, one of the other really cool things here are two new tools that have come with Perfect Effects 8. There's the adjustment brush and then the adjustable gradient. Each one of these does the exact same thing. One of them uses a brush tool and one of them uses something called our masking bug tool. And that's what I'm going to show you how to use. So when you're here in the filter stack, I'm going to click on the adjustable gradient filter. And it's going to go through and it's going to add a new adjustable gradient on it. Now, what it's doing is down below, before we play around in the image, I want to scroll down and show you the filter options pane here. You'll see that you have a whole smattering of different sliders. You have brightness and contrast. Then you've got a detail slider, you've got color sliders, and you even have a glow slider down at the bottom. What these two different tools do, the adjustable gradient and the adjustment brush, is they give you the ability to selectively edit areas of your photo using the brush tool to create a mask or using the gradient tool to create a gradient-based mask. So for this, right now, it's set to a preset of lighten. Wherever I decide I want to lighten my image, I can play around with the masking bug that we're going to use to create the gradient. And the masking bug is this little white line that you're seeing right in the center of my photo. That dot in the middle is where you decide to move it around. So I can click inside that and move it. You'll see that it's lightening the top part of my photo. So as I move it around, anywhere that's above this circle is getting lighter. If I need to rotate it, there's a button on the left-hand side that I can click on, and I can choose which direction I want this to be. So I want to make an adjustment to just the road and leave all of the trees alone. So I'm going to go ahead and just kind of scoot this into place here, and I can rotate that around. And then the last part of the masking bug is going to be the dotted line on the top and the dotted line on the bottom. These indicate the feathering amount between the edge of the mask. So if I click and drag these dotted lines out, it's going to create a softer gradient. If I pull them closer towards the center, it's going to create basically just a straight line between the top and the bottom. So when I'm using the adjustable gradient, I always like to have a nice big soft feather because it creates a little bit more of an easy transition between the top and the bottom, and it doesn't look quite so fake. So let's go ahead and set this into place here. Now, once we've created this mask and we know where it is, I can actually keep playing inside the filter options pane. I don't want to necessarily lighten the road that much, so I'm just going to take my brightness slider and move it to the left. And you'll see as I move this slider around, it's only affecting the area that we chose with the masking bug. So we're lightening it up a little bit. Now, I also want to add, let's say, a little bit of contrast to that area. So I'll take the contrast slider, move it to the right. I want to add a little bit of warmth. So I'm going to take the color slider and move that over to the right. And that whole area with the dirt and the moss and the grass is getting a bit warmer. And then I'm going to take the vibrance slider and move it even more to the right, because I really want that to pop out a bit. So now I've created this really great customizable mask here with my adjustable gradient layer. And the adjustment brush works just the same. Once you have it selected, you can use the brush tool to paint in and create a mask. And I'm going to open up another image so I can kind of show you guys a little bit more about masking here in Effects. So this was just kind of a starter image. Now, once you're done inside the program, I'm going to go ahead and click Apply in the bottom right-hand corner of the screen. And that's going to go through and apply whatever effects that you've added here in the program and bring you back to whatever base program you were working in. So once it's done applying the effects, it's going to bring me back into Lightroom. What's wonderful about working in a program like Lightroom and Aperture is you get a side-by-side comparison of your original image and your after image, which is nice. In Lightroom, they call it stacking. I don't know what they call it in Aperture, but it's the very same idea. You get two photos, you get your original image, and then you get to see your after photo. And in a layered-based program like Photoshop or Photoshop Elements, you have different types of layers, and you can see your layers on and off, which is really nice. So we can see that nice before and after there. Okay, let's go ahead and take another image into the program so I can show you some of the other really cool things in there. All right, we've got our photo. We're going to go ahead and right-click and choose Perfect Effects 8. We're going to edit a copy there. Now, there are a lot of masking tools available inside Effects, and we didn't really touch on them much with the last image. So this photo, I really want to make sure that I mention how these tools work, because it makes a lot more sense when you really see it and it's visually right in front of you. I'm going to go over to the left-hand side to my filter library, and I'm just going to choose a very, very obvious filter. So I'm going to open up the texturizer here. Now, the texturizer is really fun to play with, and we'll talk about it a little bit so that I can show you how it works, because it's such an amazing program. There are tons of different textures in here that you can add, as well as the ability to add your own textures in here using the Extras Manager, which you have access to. So you can choose what type of textures you'd like to be in here. I'm going to scroll through and choose just kind of one at random because I don't want to spend too much time looking for textures, but we're going to go through and scroll down and choose Recycled. We'll go ahead and click to apply it. And this is kind of like a recycled grungy paper texture. It's really fun. I really like this because it creates a cool postcard style look, and I think it's really nice. So this is one of my favorite textures. On the right-hand side of the screen in the Filter Options pane, the texturizer has a lot of different advanced options. You can readjust what texture you'd like by opening up the Category drop-down menu. You'll see everything is separated down into which category of texture you'd like to add. I love the paper category. That's the one I use the most, followed probably by the metal category, which has some cool grunge textures in there. And then once you've chosen a category, you can open up the texture drop-down menu and you can find another one. And anytime you hover your mouse over a texture, it's going to show you an example of what it looks like on your photo. So there are tons of options in here. I'm actually going to go down and choose this one called Tattered Paper Blue. We'll go ahead and click on it. Now, underneath you have a mode drop-down menu. This chooses how you'd like the texture to blend into your image. Right now it's set to normal, but I can change it to subtle, which will be a little bit less high contrast. Lighter, which is going to brighten up the image, and then darker, which is going to darken the image. So I'm going to go ahead and choose normal there. There's an opacity slider, so you can choose the strength of the texture and how intense it is on your image, as well as a couple of other advanced options. There's a hue and a saturation slider. You can actually adjust the color of just the texture. So if I take the hue slider and I move it to the left, you'll see that it's adjusting the color of that paper that I'm applying, but technically my background image is staying the same. It's just how that new color is readjusting and mixing with my image below. Now, I can also go through and desaturate the texture if I don't want to add any color to my image. I just wanted to have that really cool cracked paper look. I don't want to have to worry about the overlay color. I can just desaturate the texture, which is really cool. If I want a little bit of a blue hue, I can leave that saturation in there. And then I can also choose to lighten or darken just the texture. So I can darken it and make it more intense, or I can lighten it, which I'm probably going to do, so that my image doesn't get quite so dark. The last option is scale. You can actually scale the texture out. If I want to make sure that those cracks and tears are a little bit more obvious, I can make that texture bigger, or I can pull it down and make it a little bit smaller. Now, anytime that you apply a filter in the filter stack, there's going to be this little white rectangle that's next to your photo. This is the mask that's attached to every single filter in the filter stack. It doesn't matter what filter it is outside of your original photo, it will have a mask attached to it. You don't have to use it if you don't want to, but for instance, for an image like this, let's say that I want to mask out part of the mountain here. I don't like it underneath this texture, but I like the texture on the sky and maybe a lot of the lake. Up in the top left-hand corner of the screen, next to, sandwiched kind of between the preview of your image and the filter library, you've got a little set of tools. I have the hand tool selected right now, which lets me move around the image, and there's a zoom tool here. But I'm going to go up to the top and choose the masking brush. Now, if you've ever used a masking tool, it's going to work exactly the same as a mask inside Photoshop or Elements. It's going to work, if you own the entire suite, it's going to work the same as using a mask in Perfect Layers. But all we're going to do is paint out this texture and remove it from the image because we don't like it in a specific spot. In the tool options bar, you want to make sure that you set your mode properly. We're leaving it on paint out because we want to paint out the texture, but you can also paint something back in if you make a mistake, which is really nice. You can adjust the size of the brush, so I can either make it bigger or I can make it a little bit smaller. I can adjust the feathering, which is the dotted line around the entire brush there, and the larger the feather, the softer the edge will be, and then the closer that dotted line gets to the edge of the straight circle, the smaller that feathering amount is going to be. And then last, you have an opacity slider. This is really nice if you need to make very, very subtle changes. Now, the last option here is the perfect brush, and I want to show you how to use the masking brush with and without it. So we're going to go ahead and just start painting out over the mountain. And as I do so, you're going to see that it is removing that texture from the mountain. I've got a pretty clean edge down near the water, so I don't really need to worry about that. But you'll see that I'm not really painting out the area right along the edge of the mountain because it's kind of a rocky area, and I don't think I really want to go in and have to hand paint out that texture along that really weird edge. That's going to be a lot more difficult doing it by hand because it's got this really craggy bit around the top. That's when the perfect brush is going to come in handy. It's great for doing all of those really difficult edges and masks on your photos that are a little bit harder to recreate. So we're going to go ahead and turn that brush on. And what the tool does is inside the center of the brush, see this little minus sign. That's the crosshair in the center. When I click and drag over somewhere in my photo, you'll see that it's painting out the texture on the edge of the mountain, but it's leaving the sky alone. And the reason why is because the crosshair in the center of the brush is sampling color and tone information from the rocks, and it's leaving all other colors alone. So if I go and I click in, for instance, the sky, you'll see that it's going to remove the texture from just the sky, but it's going to leave the clouds alone. It doesn't matter how big or small my brush is. It's going to make sure that it's going to be very exact about those colors that I want to remove. And this is one of those really, really cool tools that is so useful when you're working on images like this one where you need to be very exact around an edge. So a lot of times I like to mask out kind of the center of the area I need to remove, and then I go back with my perfect brush and I just clean up the edge of my mask. And now I have this really cool texture. We've gone through and created this nice mask. You can see it in my filter stack on the right-hand side, and it's only applying that filter around the edge of the mountain. Masks can be used for any different filter that you apply, any different filter. So it doesn't matter whether it's a texture, border, whether it's a black and white layer or a bleach bypass layer or a vintage layer. Anything can have a mask if you want it. Now, if you make any mistakes, you have an undo button. It's either up in your edit menu, you'll find undo, or it's Control or Command Z. So if you make an accidental mistake, so I just kind of, oh no, I painted through the sky. That's so horrible. It looks awful. If I press Control or Command Z, it will undo that brush change for me. You can also reset your entire mask up in the top right-hand corner of the tool options bar, as well as invert it. So if I click the invert button, it swaps, and now the only area that's being affected by my texture is the mountain. So I can use the invert button as well as the reset button to make my mask work for me. So there are tons of different ways that you can work with masks, and it's such a useful tool to have access to, especially if you're going to be doing a lot of really cool editing here in Effects. Now, the last button here in the filter stack is a trash icon, and I want to show you how that works. It's kind of strange at first. So I'm going to go up and I'm just going to add some crazy different textures here so that you can see that I've got this wild filter stack here on the right. So I have 3 different textures here that I've applied to the image, and I really don't like what it's doing to my photo. I could go through and I could use the minus button and delete each selected filter and go through and remove all of them. But if I have multiple different filters, I can just click the delete all filters button. It's the trash icon down on the bottom right-hand corner, and it removes everything from my entire filter stack. Now, if you click that button by mistake, you can press Control or Command Z on your keyboard, and it will undo that trash icon clicking that you just did. So it'll undo that delete that you did for all those different filters. So just in case you make that mistake, the Control or Command Z will save you from that accident. I've done that before. I wasn't paying attention yesterday when I was doing some editing for a friend, and I deleted an entire filter stack before I saved my photo because I'm a dork. So just make sure that if you make any mistakes, you've got your hands very close to that Control or Command Z, because if you're like me, sometimes you're forgetful and you click the wrong button. So always know that that's down there on the bottom right-hand corner. Now, the last thing that I want to talk to you guys about before I answer some questions, which if you have any questions, feel free to ask them. I always save the last 10 or 15 minutes for getting to those. So if there's anything you want to know about effects, feel free to ask and I'll get to those. But I want to talk to you about presets. Well, we haven't really hit that yet. Presets are the last tab on the left-hand side. I'll go ahead and select it. These are all of the pre-packaged presets that come with perfect effects. Now, what a preset is when you're working inside the filters, let's go ahead and I'm going to very quickly add some layers to my image. So we've got this cool texture layer. I'm going to go ahead and add a color enhancer layer in there to make the image have cool shadows. And let's go in and let's add one more kind of crazy weird one. We'll add an HDR look in there to make it look really strange. So we've gone in and we've created this really weird preset, but let's say I love it and I want to use that again. I like the texture, I like the color enhancer, and I like this crazy HDR look. So I want to be able to save each one of those different filters to re-access them. At the top of my screen, in all of these different menus, I'm going to open up the preset menu and choose Save Preset. these actually give you the ability to save all of those different filters that you combined together in your filter stack and re-access them. So let's call this Processed Hdr look. And underneath, there's going to be a category drop-down menu here. We're going to go ahead and choose a category. These are all of the ones that come with the program when you first open it up. You can add your own categories. On my personal computer, I have tons of different presets and tons of different categories. So we'll go ahead and click Add New Category. And we'll just call this Liz's Presets and click OK. We can type in a creator and a description if we want to. So if you share them with friends, if you want to remember why you created it, you can go through and go ahead and just select a description. And once I click create, it's not going to actually do anything right away that we can see. But back in that presets library, if I open up Liz's presets, right up at the top is the cross-processed HDR look. Now let's say that we brought another image that I shot on the same day as this photo. I brought it into Perfect Effects, and I want to add that exact same filter stack so that my photos look unified. When I click on Cross-Processed HDR look, on the right-hand side, that filter stack should look exactly the same. We have HDR, Color Enhancer, and Texturizer all in the same stack. Now, each one of these different presets, you can edit them if you'd like to. So let's say that the HDR look is not necessarily working for me. I don't really like it on this iteration of that image. I can just delete that filter, and now let's say I like this photo a little bit better. So anytime you add a preset and you want to change it, you can always just select the filter that you'd like to adjust, do so, and move on with your editing process. Now, there are tons of different presets that you can add. There are categories that you can create. You can import presets, which is really fun. So if you go up to the preset menu and choose Import Preset, I have some on my desktop that I'm going to import from my friend Johnny Davenport. And these are some of these really beautiful film presets that he created, and I really love them. And he does really cool presets. So I can go ahead and select a preset that I'd like to import that maybe I got from a friend. And when I click open, it's just going to ask you which category you want to place it in. So I could add a new category and we'll call it Johnny's Presets and click OK. And when I'm done, now I have this really cool old San Francisco preset that Johnny had created that I can now use on my images. And you'll see that on the right-hand side, he used a lot of different filters. So you can use 2, 3, 4, 8, 10, 12 filters. It doesn't matter how many. You can stack as many as you want together to create the style that you're going for. All right, so let's go through and we're going to go ahead and start back from the beginning. One of the last things that I want to mention to you is what opacity is. And we're going to go and open up that preset one more time. Here, actually, let's open up one of the categories here that's prepackaged, the vintage category. This is one of my favorites. I love all of the vintage presets. So I'm going to scroll down and choose one down at the bottom called Mayor, and we'll click to apply it. You'll see it's got 5 different filters stacked together. Now, one of the filters in here is a vignette, and I can turn it on and off, and I like that filter, but the light leak that's underneath it is not my favorite. There are 2 different opacity sliders in the filter stack. The first is a master opacity slider. This adjusts global opacity for every single filter in the entire stack. So if I take the master opacity slider and I move it to the left, every single one of those different filters, from the vignette to the light leak to that crazy cracked texture that's on the image, will slowly start to disappear. So as I play around with that master opacity, every single different filter is adjusting. The layer opacity only affects the layer that you have chosen. So I have that vignette layer selected. If I take the layer opacity slider, it's going to decrease the vignette but leave everything else underneath it alone. This is just another one of those tools that you can put into your tool well of things that you can use to play around with these different effects. This texture that's added to my image is way too intense. I don't really like it, so I'm just going to take the layer opacity and drop it down so that it's not quite so red. And now I've gone through and I've customized this filter. I like the way it looks a little bit better than when it did before. And now I can export and save my image the way that it is. So don't ever be afraid of taking the presets that are here on the left-hand side and readjusting them to your needs, because everything is different. Every photo is different, and every person is different with what they like. So I always like to make sure I mention that you can edit and change everything if you want to. Now, one of the last things that I want to mention to you guys before we head out is if you add a whole bunch of different filters to your image, and you've got this really cool effect going on, when you click the apply button, all of those different filters that you were just working with have been squished and flattened. If I took this exact photo back into Perfect Effects, I wouldn't be able to see that same filter stack that we saw before. So you want to make sure that you're careful and smart about all of your editing in the program, because if I exit it, I have lost that stack of things that I was working on. That's one of the main reasons why I suggest that you save presets for everything that you do. Because if you do so, you have the awesome ability of, let's say I really wanted to mess with the light leak that's on the bottom of this filter. I'm probably not going to remember all of those changes that I made to all of those different layers to create that preset. But if I had saved it, I don't have to worry about going back in and trying to recreate all of the steps that I probably forgot. So save a preset for pretty much everything that you do, because you never know when you're going to use it. And presets take up little to no space on your computer, so it's not like you're going to be exerting a lot of energy into creating presets and saving them. They're very minuscule. You can transport them on hard drives and send them in emails. Very, very basic stuff. And you can make tons of them. So I love presets. It's my favorite way to work inside Perfect Effects. And I always like to make sure I emphasize how great and how useful they can be in the program.